I'm Michael, 34 male, and I discovered my wife was secretly pregnant by her married boss, plotting to trap me for child support and my inheritance. It was a perfectly constructed lie designed to secure her future at the expense of mine. But she made one critical mistake: she underestimated me. She never imagined that my grief would turn into cold resolve and that two simple pieces of paper, two DNA test reports, would become her ultimate nightmare. It's strange how the ugliest truths can hide behind the most beautiful facades. Our home was one of those facades. It was a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a garden Alina, my wife, had meticulously cultivated. Our life, to anyone looking in, was just as pristine. We were the couple people pointed to as an example of modern success. I was a rising architect with a firm that was finally landing major contracts, and she was a brilliant senior project manager at a high-flying tech company. We had been married for 5 years, together for 8, and built a world that felt solid, secure, and full of promise. But a foundation built on lies is just sand and dust waiting for a storm. I just couldn't see it yet. Looking back now, the warning signs were there, scattered like faint cracks in the plaster. They were small, easy-to-dismiss moments that, when threaded together, paint a chilling picture of a betrayal that had been growing in the shadows for a long time. The first significant crack appeared about a year ago. Alina had started working later and later. It was always under the guise of a major project launch, a looming deadline that demanded her full attention. Her boss, the company's charismatic CEO Mark, was apparently a relentless perfectionist. Mark expects nothing less than 110%, she'd say with a sigh that seemed equal parts exhaustion and admiration. I accepted it. Her career was important to her, and I wanted to be a supportive husband. One evening, I had prepared a special dinner to celebrate the anniversary of our first date. I'd made her favorite pasta from scratch, lit candles, and opened a bottle of the expensive wine we'd been saving. 7 o'clock came and went, then 8. At 9:30, she finally walked through the door looking flushed and distracted. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry. I completely lost track of time," she said, dropping her briefcase by the door. Mark had us all in the boardroom hashing out the final details for the quarterly presentation. It was brutal. I tried to hide my disappointment. "It's okay, we can still eat." She picked at the now lukewarm pasta, her eyes glued to her phone, which buzzed incessantly. "I just need to reply to this one last email from Mark," she murmured, her thumbs flying across the screen. There was a faint, almost secretive smile on her face as she typed. It wasn't the smile of someone under a brutal workload, it was something else, something I couldn't place. That night when she thought I was asleep, I saw her standing by the window in the moonlight, her phone clutched in her hand, that same smile gracing her lips. I rolled over, a cold stone of unease settling in my stomach, and told myself I was being paranoid. The second crack was about money, specifically my money. My grandfather had passed away 2 years prior, leaving me as the sole beneficiary of a considerable trust fund and a portfolio of properties. It was a significant inheritance, one that wouldn't become fully accessible until my 35th birthday, which was now less than a year away. My family had always been private about its wealth, and I was raised to be humble and hardworking, so I rarely thought about it. But Alina started thinking about it a lot. It began subtly. "You know, Michael," she said one afternoon while we were lounging on the sofa, "we should really start planning for the future more seriously. When your inheritance comes through, we could invest in a much larger property, maybe something with a guest house." I was taken aback. "We just bought this house, I thought we loved it here." "Of course I love it," she said quickly, her tone a little too bright. "But we have to be smart. That kind of money is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We can't just let it sit there, we need to make it work for us." Her obsession grew over the following months. She started talking to financial planners without telling me. She would leave brochures for high-risk, high-reward investment schemes on the kitchen counter. It felt less like collaborative future planning and more like she was drawing up a business plan for my life with my inheritance as the seed capital. Anytime I tried to steer the conversation back to our present, to our life as it was, she'd get frustrated. "Don't you want more, Michael?" She'd ask, a sharp edge to her voice. "Don't you want to provide the best possible life for our future family?" That was her favorite phrase, our future family. It was the emotional leverage she used to juice. Typhi her sudden, almost manic focus on my finances. This brings me to the third crack, the one that should have shattered the whole illusion. We were at a dinner party with friends. One of our friends, Chloe, was talking about her decision to leave her corporate job to open a small bakery. Her eyes shone with passion as she described her plans. "That's amazing, Chloe," I said, genuinely happy for her. "I've always thought about doing something similar one day. Maybe opening my own small architecture firm, focusing on sustainable, community-focused projects instead of these big corporate contracts. I expected Alina to smile, to offer a word of encouragement as she always had in the past. Instead, a frown creased her forehead. Later that night in the car on the way home, she turned to me. "You weren't serious back there, were you?" "About what, the firm?" "Yes," she said, her voice tight. "Michael, that's a ridiculous risk. You have a stable, high-paying job. Starting your own business is a financial black hole. 90% of them fail in the first 5 years. We can't afford that kind of instability, especially not now." "Especially not now, what does that mean?" I asked, confused. "We're more financially secure than we've ever been." She looked away, out the passenger window. "It just seems foolish to trade a sure thing for a pipe dream. We need to be practical." The word practical sounded cold and alien coming from her. This was the woman who had encouraged me to pursue architecture in the first place, who had stayed up late helping me study for exams, who had always said she believed in my talent. Now my dream was just a pipe dream, an impractical risk to her financial security. The disconnect was jarring. Her support, which I had thought was a bedrock of our relationship, now seemed conditional, tied directly to the size of my paycheck and the promise of my inheritance. I was an architect. My entire profession revolved around understanding structure, integrity, and the hidden things that hold a building together. Yet in my own home, in my own marriage, I had failed to see that the supporting beams were rotten. Alina was no longer the partner I had married. She was a project manager and our life was her project. The objective wasn't shared happiness, it was profit. And I, along with my inheritance, was the asset she was determined to acquire. The pregnancy was simply the final, brilliant phase of her hostile takeover. The announcement came on a Sunday morning. The air was soft with the smell of brewing coffee and fresh laundry. It was a perfect domestic scene, the kind of quiet weekend morning that had become increasingly rare. Alina came and sat beside me at the kitchen island, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. She had an unreadable expression on her face, a blend of anxiety and something that looked like triumph. "Michael," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I have something to tell you." My mind raced through a dozen possibilities, most of them bad. Was she quitting her job? Was something wrong with her parents? She took a deep breath and placed my hand on her stomach. Her own hand covered mine, pressing it gently against her flat abdomen. "We're pregnant," she said, her eyes searching mine for a reaction. For a single solitary moment, pure, unadulterated joy washed over me. A baby, a family, it was everything I'd ever wanted. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, erased every doubt, every suspicion, every one of those little cracks in our foundation. I saw a future filled with tiny shoes by the door, crayon drawings on the fridge, and the sound of laughter echoing through the halls of our home. "Are you serious?" I breathed, a wide smile spreading across my face. "Alina, that's incredible." I pulled her into a hug, lifting her off her feet. She laughed, but it was a thin, brittle sound. When I set her down, the triumphant look in her eyes had intensified, and the anxiety had all but vanished. It was the look of someone who had just successfully closed a very difficult deal. "I took 3 tests this morning," she said, pulling them from her robe pocket to show me the faint pink lines. "All positive. I have a doctor's appointment on Tuesday to confirm." The initial euphoria carried me through the rest of the day, but as evening fell, the cold stone of unease began to reform in my gut. It started with a simple calculation. Our intimate life had dwindled significantly over the past few months. I could count the number of times we had been together on one hand, chalking it up to her stressful job and my own demanding deadlines. As I tried to pinpoint the last time, a specific week came to mind, a week she had claimed to be overwhelmed with a work conference that Mark had insisted she attend. She'd been distant and tired when she got back. The timing felt off. I pushed the thought away, scolding myself for letting my paranoia tie. This happy news. I was going to be a father. I needed to be supportive, to be the husband she deserved. But Alina's behavior in the following weeks made it impossible to ignore my growing dread. The pregnancy became a shield she used to deflect any and all questions. If I asked about her day, she'd plead pregnancy fatigue and retreat to the bedroom. If I tried to initiate any physical affection, she would gently push me away, saying she was feeling nauseous or that she needed her space. Our home, once a shared space, was now divided into zones. Her phone, once left casually on the counter, was now either clutched in her hand or locked and face down. She would take calls in the garden or step out onto the porch, her voice a low murmur that the wind carried away. The most glaring change was her relationship with Mark. He went from being a demanding boss to a saint-like figure. He sent extravagant bouquets of flowers to our house to congratulate us. He insisted she take a company car service to and from work for her comfort and safety. Mark has been so incredibly supportive, she'd gush. He told me to take all the time I need to put my health and the baby's health first. He's really a wonderful man. The way she said his name, Mark, was different. It was softer, more familiar. It sounded less like a boss's name and more like a term of endearment. The breaking point, the moment my suspicion crystallized into sickening certainty, happened on a rainy Tuesday night. Alina was supposedly at a late dinner with her team to celebrate a successful quarter. I was working late in my home office when I heard the chime of the car service in the driveway. I glanced at the clock, 8:30 p.m. It was earlier than I expected. I went downstairs, ready to greet her, but stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The front door was ajar and I could hear her voice, low and intimate, coming from the porch. She was on the phone. I know, she was saying, a soft, cooing sound in her voice I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I miss you too. It's so hard pretending all day. A pause, I held my breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. No, Michael doesn't suspect a thing, she continued, and her name for me sounded like an insult. He's completely over the moon. He's already talking about converting the guest room into a nursery. Yes, our plan is working perfectly. Once his inheritance comes through, we'll have everything we need. You and I can finally start our life, and this baby will have the security it deserves. Another pause, her voice dropped even lower, full of a chilling sort of affection. I have to go, he'll be wondering where I am. I love you, Mark. She hung up. The world went silent, save for the drumming of the rain on the roof and the roar of blood in my ears. I love you, Mark. The words echoed in the empty space of my chest, a final confirmation that detonated my entire world. It wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. The baby, our baby, wasn't ours at all, it was theirs. It was a pawn in a long, calculated game designed to defraud me of my future, my money, and my dignity. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. I stumbled back from the stairs and retreated into the darkness of the living room just as she pushed the door open, shaking the rain from her coat. Michael, are you here? She called out, her voice back to its normal, wifely tone. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. I just stood there in the shadows, my mind replaying her words. Our plan is working perfectly. The woman I had loved, the woman carrying what I thought was my child, was a stranger, and she wasn't just betraying me, she was methodically, gleefully setting a trap, and I had walked right into it with a stupid, hopeful smile on my face. The joy I had felt was a lie. The future I had envisioned was a mirage. In its place was a cold, hard, and terrifying truth. The 48 hours following that phone call were a masterclass in self-control. I moved through my life like an actor playing a part. I was Michael, the expectant father. I smiled when Alina talked about baby names. I nodded when she showed me catalogs for cribs and strollers. I discussed her pregnancy cravings and rubbed her back when she complained of morning sickness. On the outside, I was the picture of a doting husband. On the inside, I was a hollowed-out cavern of silent, screaming rage. Every loving glance she gave me felt like an insult. Every touch was a violation. Her entire existence in my home had become an elaborate piece of performance art, and I was her captive audience of one. But I couldn't let the mask slip. Her words on the porch had been a gift, a fatal mistake that gave me the one thing I needed, knowledge. She thought I was a fool, and for her plan to continue working, I had to let her believe it. My mind, trained to see blueprints and structural weak points, began to analyze the situation with a cold architectural debt. It meant her plan had a foundation, the affair, support beams, the pregnancy, and a clear objective, my inheritance. To defeat it, I had to dismantle it piece by piece, starting with irrefutable proof. My word against hers would devolve into a messy, emotional battle. I needed cold, hard facts. The investigation began in the dead of night in my own home. After she fell asleep, a deep, untroubled slumber that I now found monstrous, I slipped out of bed and went to her office, her laptop. It was password protected, of course. But after 8 years together, I knew her patterns. I tried her mother's birthday, nothing. I tried our anniversary, nothing. Then I thought about her new god, Mark. I typed in his last name followed by the year they started working together. Access granted. A chill went down my spine. It was so simple, so arrogant. She was hiding everything in plain sight. I didn't know what I was looking for, so I started with the obvious, her email. There was her work inbox filled with corporate jargon, and then there was a personal account. I clicked on it. The screen filled with messages, hundreds of them between her and an account named M. Knight. A Knight, how nauseatingly cliché. The emails went back nearly 2 years. I started reading. My hands trembled and I had to bite down on my knuckle to keep from crying out. It was all there. The beginning of their affair during a business trip to Chicago. The secret lunches, the late nights at the office that were never about work, the hotel rooms booked under false names. They documented their entire betrayal with a casual, almost mundane proficiency. Then I found the more recent messages, the ones from the last few months. They were no longer just about secret meetings, they were about strategy. From M. Night to Elena. Subject the plan. Darling, are you sure Michael is buying the timeline? We can't afford any slip-ups here. My own situation is complicated enough without him getting suspicious. From Elena to M. Night. Subject Ray the plan. Don't worry, my love, he's completely oblivious. He's an artist, not a numbers guy. He sees a baby and he gets sentimental. He's already talking about putting a down payment on a bigger house once the big day comes for his inheritance. It's perfect. This child will have the life you and I can't give it publicly yet, and will have the resources to build our real future. The words artist, not a numbers guy, burned into my brain. She saw my passion, the very core of who I was, as a weakness to be exploited. She saw my sentimentality as a tool for her deception. I felt a surge of something colder and harder than anger. It was a desire for justice, not just justice, but retribution. I used my phone to take pictures of every single incriminating email, my screen a silent flash in the darkness. Then I moved on. I found a hidden folder on her cloud drive labeled financial projections. It wasn't for her company. It was a detailed spreadsheet outlining my assets, my salary, my savings, and a meticulously researched estimate of my inheritance, complete with links to property value assessments and stock market performance charts. Next to that was a column titled Projected Child Support Alimony, with calculations running for 18 years. It was a business plan for ruining my life. I copied the entire folder onto a small, encrypted USB drive I kept on my keychain. As I worked, my grief began to recede, replaced by a crystalline focus. The emotional, heartbroken husband was being walled off brick by brick. In his place stood an architect designing the most important project of his life, Elena's downfall. My first move was to protect my assets. The next morning, I called in sick to work and made an appointment with a man my father had recommended years ago for estate planning. Mr. Harrison was not just any lawyer, he was a shark, a man known for his razor-sharp intellect and his utter lack of sentimentality in the courtroom. He was exactly what I needed. I sat in his mahogany-paneled office, the leather chair cool against my back. I laid it all out for him, the affair, the overheard phone call, the emails, the spreadsheet. I spoke with a calm, steady voice that felt disconnected from the turmoil inside me. I showed him the pictures on my phone. Mr. Harrison listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting on his chin. His expression was impassive, but I could see a flicker of something in his eyes, not pity but professional appreciation for a well-documented case. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Michael," he said, his voice a low gravel, "your wife is ambitious, I'll give her that, and remarkably foolish." "Foolish?" I asked. "It feels pretty airtight to me." "Airtight plans have a habit of springing leaks when exposed to the law," he replied. "She has committed what we call fraud in the inducement. She is attempting to secure financial gain through deliberate deception regarding the paternity of a child. It's about as ugly as it gets in family law, but her ugliness is our advantage." He then laid out the strategy. "First," he said, holding up a finger, "you do nothing. You go home and you continue to be the happy, oblivious, expectant father. Let her dig her own hole deeper. The more she invests in this lie, the harder she will fall. Second," he continued, "we need undeniable, legally admissible proof. These emails are fantastic, but the cornerstone of our case will be DNA. We need to prove two things, that you are not the father and that Mark is." "How do I do that?" I asked. "She'll never agree to a test if she knows I'm suspicious." "She won't have to," Mr. Harrison said with a thin smile. "There are non-invasive prenatal paternity tests that can be done with a blood sample from the mother and a cheek swab from the potential father. You can offer to go with her to a routine blood test and we'll arrange for the lab to collect the necessary samples. As for Mark, that will be trickier. We need a discarded item with his DNA on it. A coffee cup, a used napkin, a strand of hair. You'll need to be creative." A plan began to form in my mind, a risky but brilliant idea. I knew Elena kept a framed photo of her executive team on her desk at home. Mark was front and center. I also knew that her company held a big annual charity gala, an event she always dragged me to. This year it was in 3 weeks. Mark would be there. He would be drinking, eating, and speaking. He would be leaving his DNA everywhere. I left Mr. Harrison's office feeling like a different man. The weight of the betrayal was still there, a dense, heavy mass in my chest, But it was no longer just a source of pain. It was fuel. Alina and Mark thought they were in control, manipulating a sentimental artist. They had no idea they were now the unwitting subjects of a meticulous, calculated, and deeply personal architectural project. And I was going to deconstruct their world down to the studs. The 3 weeks leading up to the charity gala were the longest of my life. Living a double life was exhausting. By day, I was the supportive husband, listening to Alina's detailed plans for the nursery, feigning excitement over ultrasound photos that I knew were a lie. I'd look at the grainy black and white image on our fridge and feel a profound sense of sorrow for the innocent child caught in this web of deceit. This baby deserved a father, just not one who was being blackmailed into the role. At night, I was a strategist, poring over the details of the gala with Mr. Harrison. We had a private investigator, a discreet professional named Costello, on retainer. Costello's job would be to shadow Mark all evening and secure a sample. My job was to play my part and create the opportunity. Alina was thrilled. I was so eager to attend the gala this year. In the past, I'd always groaned about the stuffy atmosphere and corporate schmoozing. This time, I talked about how important it was to make a good impression on Mark for the sake of our growing family. "I'm so glad you're finally seeing it that way, Michael," she said, beaming. "Mark is a very influential man. Having him in our corner will be a huge advantage for us." The us she was referring to was clearly her and Mark, but the irony was lost on her. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the downtown hotel was a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns. Alina was radiant in a deep blue dress, her hand resting protectively on her small but growing baby bump. She navigated the room with practiced ease, introducing me to her colleagues, all of whom offered their hearty congratulations. Every handshake felt like a lie, every smile a confirmation of my humiliation. Then I saw him, Mark. He was exactly as I'd pictured him from his photos, tall, confident, with silvering hair and the predatory smile of a man who was used to getting whatever he wanted. He made his way towards us, his eyes fixed on Alina with an intensity that he barely tried to hide. "Alina, you look stunning," he boomed, kissing her on both cheeks. The gesture was far too familiar for a boss. He then turned to me, extending a hand. "And you must be Michael. I've heard so much about you. Congratulations on the big news." I shook his hand, my grip firm, my expression neutral. "Thank you, Mark. Alina speaks very highly of you." It took every ounce of my willpower not to crush his hand. "She's a superstar," he said, placing a proprietary hand on the small of Alina's back. "The best project manager I've ever had. We're all so thrilled for you both." Throughout the evening, I watched them. From a distance, they looked like a CEO and his valued employee. But I could see the subtle tells, the lingering touches, the shared glances that lasted a fraction of a second too long, the way they would drift into a corner for a private word about work. They were so arrogant, so sure of their S. Accurate that they were careless. Meanwhile, Costello, a nondescript man in a simple gray suit, moved like a ghost through the crowd. I saw him near the bar when Mark ordered a whiskey, and later near the dessert table where Mark carelessly tossed a used napkin. My part of the plan came after the main speeches. As I'd predicted, Mark, as CEO, gave the keynote address. He spoke eloquently about corporate responsibility and philanthropy. As he finished to a round of applause, I approached the stage with 2 glasses of champagne. "Mark, that was a fantastic speech," I said, offering him a glass. "Truly inspiring." He preened, taking the glass. "Thank you, Michael. Glad you enjoyed it." "To a successful year," I said, raising my glass. We clinked them together and he took a healthy swallow. We chatted for a few minutes about architecture and the economy, a surreal, sickeningly normal conversation. All the while, I kept my eyes on his glass. When a colleague of his pulled him away to discuss something, he placed the half-empty champagne flute down on a nearby table. That was my cue. I casually walked past the table, feigning a stumble. My arm knocked the glass, and it fell to the carpeted floor with a soft thud, thankfully not breaking. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered, bending down to retrieve it. As I did, my hand closed around the stem, my thumb carefully preserving the area where his lips had been. I straightened up, holding the glass. In the same motion, I signaled to Costello, who was standing near the exit. He gave a subtle nod. I walked towards the nearest service station, and as I passed a large floral arrangement, I placed the glass behind the vase. Seconds later, Costello drifted by and the glass vanished. It was done. The first phase of the DNA plan was complete. The second phase happened the following Tuesday. I had told Alina that my doctor had recommended some genetic screening for me, given some family history, and suggested we could get our blood work done at the same time. "It'll be more efficient," I'd said casually. She agreed, seeing it as another sign of my investment in our child. At the lab, which Mr. Harrison had prearranged, a nurse drew my blood and then Alina. Alina was chattering excitedly about feeling the baby kick for the first time. I just smiled and nodded, feeling a profound wave of nausea that had nothing to do with needles. The nurse, following Mr. Harrison's precise instructions, also took a cheek swab from me for the paternity panel, which she presented to Alina as a standard part of the prenatal screening package. Alina, completely unsuspecting, signed the consent form without a second thought. The lab promised the results in 7 to 10 business days. It was another period of agonizing waiting. I felt like a man walking a tightrope over a canyon. Below me was chaos, and my only focus was getting to the other side. The email from Mr. Harrison arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The subject line was simply, "Reports." My heart hammered against my ribs. I closed my office door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I opened the encrypted attachment. There were 2 PDF files inside. File 1, Prenatal Paternity Analysis, Case 734P. Alleged father Michael Turner's child unborn. Conclusion: the alleged father, Michael Turner, is excluded as the biological father of the unborn child. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0%. I stared at the number, the 2 simple characters that confirmed my entire world had been a lie. I felt a strange mixture of devastation and vindication. It was real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was betrayed. Then I opened the second file. File 2, Genetic Profile Comparison, Case 734G. Sample A, DNA collected from champagne flute, attributed to Mark Knight. Sample B, fetal DNA from maternal blood sample. Conclusion: the genetic profile of Sample A is consistent with that of the biological father of the fetus in Sample B. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. There it was, the truth, unraveled and laid bare in the cold, objective language of science. Not only was I not the father, but her married boss, Mark, unequivocally was. The emails, the phone call, the spreadsheet, it all coalesced around these 2 reports, forming a diamond-hard case of fraud, conspiracy, and breathtaking cruelty. I leaned back in my chair, the printed reports in my hand. The tightrope walker had reached the other side. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But for the first time in months, I felt solid ground beneath my feet. I was no longer a victim stumbling in the dark. I was a man holding the truth in his hands, and the truth, I was beginning to realize, was a weapon. The time for defense was over. It was time to plan my attack. With the 2 DNA reports secured, the emotional fog of grief and confusion finally lifted, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The objective was no longer just about survival, it was about justice. Na and Mark had conspired to ruin my life for financial gain, using the life of an innocent child as their primary tool. They deserved to have their world dismantled with the same clinical precision they had used to plan my downfall. I met with Mr. Harrison the next day. I slid the 2 printed lab reports across his polished desk. He put on his reading glasses, studied them for a moment, and then looked up at me, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Flawless," he said, tapping the papers. "This is the legal equivalent of a royal flush. We have motive, we have conspiracy, and now we have incontrovertible scientific proof. So the question is, what do you want to do with it?" "I want to expose them," I said, my voice low and steady. "I don't want to just file for divorce quietly. I want them to face the consequences of what they've done. I want Alina to understand that I am not the sentimental fool she took me for. And I want Mark to lose everything he built on lies." Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his expression serious. "A public confrontation can be messy, Michael. It can open you up to emotional distress." "The emotional distress is already there," I countered. "It's been my constant companion for months. Hiding this, letting them get away with it would be worse. I need to do this for myself, to reclaim my own story. I want to control the narrative." He nodded slowly, seeing the resolve in my eyes. "All right, if we're going to do this, we do it my way. We control the time, the place, and the audience. No screaming matches in the living room. This will be a surgical strike, not a messy brawl." And so we began to architect the confrontation. It couldn't be just me and Alina. Her word against mine could still be twisted. We needed witnesses. But who? My parents would be heartbroken. Her parents would be defensive. Then it hit me, the perfect audience. "Mark's wife," I said. "Her name is Cynthia. Alina has mentioned her a few times, always with a tone of pity. 'Poor Cynthia,' she'd say. 'She has no idea what Mark is really like.' The hypocrisy is staggering. Cynthia deserves to know the truth. She's as much a victim in this as I am. Mr. Harrison's smile returned, wider this time. Brilliant. Involving the other aggrieved spouse adds a powerful dimension. It isolates Alina and Mark together, making it impossible for them to support each other's lies. And one more person, my presence. As your legal counsel, I can ensure the confrontation stays on track and doesn't devolve into chaos. It also sends a very clear message. This is not just a personal dispute anymore. This is a legal matter. The plan was set. Costello, the private investigator, was tasked with one final job, to locate Cynthia Knight and deliver a simple sealed letter. The letter would be from me and it would be carefully worded by Mr. Harrison. It would not reveal the details, but would state that I had information of a critical and time-sensitive nature regarding her husband, Mark, and my wife, Alina, and that it was in her best interest to attend a private meeting at Mr. Harrison's office. The final piece of the puzzle was luring Alina. This was the easiest part. I told her that my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had finished some preliminary paperwork regarding my inheritance, and that he needed us both to come in and sign some documents to ensure that our growing family would be fully provided for. Her eyes lit up. Oh, that's wonderful, Michael. Of course, when does he need us? She saw the meeting as the finish line, the final step in securing her financial prize. The thought of walking into a lawyer's office to sign papers that would link her and her child to my inheritance was the culmination of her entire scheme. She had no idea she was walking into an execution. The day of the meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. I put on my best suit, the one I had worn to my grandfather's funeral. It felt appropriate. I was burying the man I used to be and the marriage I thought I had. Alina was buzzing with excitement, talking about all the things they would do with the money. I just nodded along, a silent observer at my own wife's final performance. We arrived at Mr. Harrison's building and took the elevator up to his 30th floor office. The view of the city was panoramic, but all I could focus on was the heavy weight of the 2 envelopes in my inner jacket pocket. Mr. Harrison's assistant led us into a large, intimidating conference room with a long mahogany table. Mr. Harrison was already seated at the head of the table, but he wasn't alone. Sitting in a chair to his right was a woman I had never met, but I recognized her instantly from photos. She was elegant, with blonde hair pulled back in a neat chignon and eyes that were red-rimmed and full of a quiet, simmering fury. It was Cynthia Knight. Alina froze in the doorway, her smile faltering. Her eyes darted from Cynthia to me and then to Mr. Harrison. The confident swagger she had walked in with evaporated, replaced by a look of pure, dawning horror. "Michael, what is this?" she stammered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "What is she doing here?" "Please have a seat, Alina," Mr. Harrison said, his voice calm and commanding. "We have a few things to discuss." I pulled out a chair for her, but she didn't move. She was trapped, a deer in the headlights. The trap she had so carefully set for me had just snapped shut on her instead. Alina remained frozen in the doorway, her face a pale mask of confusion and panic. The pieces were clicking into place in her mind, but they were forming a picture she refused to accept. "I'm not sitting down until someone tells me what's going on," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Michael, what have you done?" I didn't answer. I simply looked at her, my expression blank, and gestured again to the empty chair beside me. After a long, tense moment, she seemed to realize there was no escape. She walked stiffly to the table and sat down as far away from Cynthia Knight as possible. She wouldn't look at her. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and the sound echoed in the silent room. "Thank you all for coming. We are here today to address a matter of serious deception and potential fraud." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Alina, for the better part of a year, you have been leading your husband, Michael, to believe that you are carrying his child." Alina's head snapped up. "I am carrying his child. This is insane. Michael, tell them this is a mistake." This was the moment. The time for silence was over. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the 2 sealed envelopes. I slid the first one across the polished mahogany table until it stopped directly in front of her. "Open it, Alina," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She tore it open with fumbling fingers and pulled out the single sheet of paper. I watched her eyes scan the page, her breath catching in her throat. I saw the exact moment she read the conclusion: probability of paternity, 0%. The color drained completely from her face. She looked up at me, her expression one of utter disbelief. What is this? It's fake. You faked this," she gasped, her voice cracking. "You're trying to get out of your responsibility. I can't believe you would stoop so low." Cynthia Knight, who had been silent until now, let out a short, bitter laugh. Responsibility? My dear, you don't know the meaning of the word. Alina ignored her, her eyes still locked on me. I'll get my own test. I'll prove you're the father. You can't do this to me, Michael. I didn't do this to you, Alina, I said calmly. You did this to us. I then took the second envelope from my pocket. It felt heavier than the first. It contained the real anchor that would pull her world down into the abyss. I slid it across the table. And you're right, a single test might be disputed, which is why I took the liberty of getting a second one. She stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She knew. In that moment, she knew what it was. Her entire plan, her entire future was contained in that simple paper envelope. She didn't reach for it. So I did it for her. I opened it myself, pulled out the report, and laid it flat on the table, turning it so both she and Cynthia could read it. Genetic Profile Comparison, Case 734G. Conclusion: the genetic profile of sample A attributed to Mark Knight is consistent with that of the biological father of the fetus. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. A choked sob escaped Alina's lips. It was a raw, wounded sound. She stared at the paper, her carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around her. The game was over. There were no more moves to make. She had been utterly, completely, and scientifically exposed. Cynthia looked at the report and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. But her eyes were not sad, they were hard as flint. She turned her gaze to Alina, her voice low and venomous. So it's true, all of it, the late nights, the business trips, the constant texting, and for this. You threw away my marriage, my family, for this, to trap a good man and steal his inheritance with my husband's child. Alina couldn't speak. She just shook her head back and forth, silent tears now streaming down her face. She looked at me, her eyes begging for a lifeline, for some flicker of the sentimental fool she thought I was. She found none. The emails, Alina, I said softly, delivering the final blow. The spreadsheets planning out my finances, the text messages, the phone call I overheard on the porch, I know everything. Her face crumpled. The last ounce of fight left her and she slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands, her body shaking with convulsive sobs. This was her nightmare, not just Bay. NG caught but being so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Her plan wasn't just foiled. It was dissected, documented, and dismantled by the very person she had dismissed as an afterthought. Mr. Harrison then took control. He slid a third set of documents across the table toward her, a thick stack of papers held together by a binder clip. These, he said, his tone clinical, are divorce papers. They cite adultery and fraud. All of Michael's assets, including his pending inheritance, are declared as separate property, protected from any and all claims. You will sign them, or we will proceed with a lawsuit against both you and Mark Knight for conspiracy to commit fraud. Given the evidence we have, including a sworn affidavit from his wife, I assure you, you do not want this to go to court. He turned his attention to Cynthia. And Mrs. Knight, your own legal counsel will be receiving a full copy of our evidence this afternoon. Cynthia stood up, her composure absolute. She looked down at the weeping Alina one last time. I hope it was worth it, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Then she turned, nodded at me with a look of grim solidarity, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. Alina was left alone at the table, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. The DNA reports, the divorce papers, the empty chair where her co-conspirator's wife had sat. She was no longer a brilliant project manager in control of her destiny. She was just a woman who had gambled everything on a lie and lost in the most spectacular way possible. Her nightmare was just beginning. Mine was finally over. In the days and weeks that followed the confrontation, the fallout was swift and catastrophic for everyone but me. Alina, stripped of her leverage and facing a legal tsunami, signed the divorce papers without a fight. She moved out of the house that weekend, leaving behind the life she had tried to steal. Our marriage was dissolved not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of a pen on paper, a final, anticlimactic end to a relationship built on a lie. The shockwaves hit Mark Knight the hardest. As promised, Mr. Harrison forwarded our evidence to Cynthia's legal team. She filed for divorce the next day, and the news of the CEO's affair and his involvement in a plot to defraud another man was strategically leaked to the board of directors and eventually to the business press. His company, built on an image of integrity and forward-thinking leadership, could not withstand the scandal. He was forced to resign in disgrace, his golden parachute revoked due to a morals clause in his contract. He lost his job, his reputation, and his family in the span of a month. I heard through the grapevine that Alina had the baby, a little boy. Mark, legally established as the father, was now on the hook for child support for the next 18 years, not from a position of wealth and power but as a disgraced, unemployed executive. The very trap Alina had set for me, intended to tap into my inheritance, had instead latched onto the ruins of her lover's career. It was a bitter, ironic twist of fate that she had authored herself. For me, the aftermath was quiet. The house felt huge and empty at first. The silence that I had once craved now felt deafening. I walked through the rooms, purging every last trace of her. I packed up her clothes, her books, the ridiculously expensive kitchen gadgets she had insisted on buying. I took down the ultrasound photo from the fridge and threw it away. It was a painful but necessary process of reclaiming my space, both physically and emotionally. The inheritance came through on my 35th birthday. There was no grand celebration, no popping of champagne corks. I sat with the financial statements in front of me, the numbers representing a future that was now solely my own. The money that had been the target of so much deception now felt different. It wasn't a prize to be won or a treasure to be guarded. It was a responsibility and an opportunity, a chance to build something real, something honest. I quit my corporate architecture job a few months later. Alina's cruel words about my dream being a pipe dream had paradoxically lit a fire in me. I used a small portion of my inheritance to do exactly what I told her I wanted to do. I started my own firm, Turner Design Studio. I focused on small-scale, sustainable projects, community centers, affordable housing units, public parks. It wasn't as glamorous as designing skyscrapers, but it was meaningful. It was mine. Healing wasn't a straight line. There were days when the ghost of the betrayal would rise up, a sudden wave of anger or a deep, aching sadness. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? But with time, those questions became less important. I had been blind because I had chosen to trust. I had missed the signs because I had wanted to believe in the goodness of the person I loved. Her deceit was a reflection of her character, not a failure of mine. I learned to trust again slowly. I focused on my work, on rebuilding friendships that had been neglected, and on rediscovering the person I was before my identity became entangled with hers. I found joy not in grand gestures but in the simple, honest moments. The satisfaction of a blueprint coming to life, a shared laugh with an old friend, the quiet peace of my home now filled with my own choices. The story of what happened is a scar, a permanent part of my history, but it's a scar that I no longer try to hide. It serves as a reminder of my own resilience, of my capacity to walk through fire and emerge on the other side, not unscathed but whole. Alina and Mark tried to architect my ruin, but they failed. They didn't understand that a structure built on a weak foundation is doomed to collapse under pressure. My foundation, my integrity, my values, my dreams, was stronger than they ever imagined. And now, I am finally free to build my own future on my own terms with honesty as the cornerstone. So I have to ask you, the audience, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted her immediately, or would you have played the long game as I did? The level of betrayal was so deep, so calculated, that it tests the limits of what we think we're capable of handling. It's easy to say we'd be strong, but when you're in the eye of the storm, finding your footing is the hardest part. I chose the path of cold, hard evidence because her betrayal wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated crime of opportunity. I had to fight back on the same tactical level.